London, 1888. They called him the God of Mayfair. Sebastian St. Clair, the Duke of Alistair, possessed a fortune that could buy nations and a face that ruined marriages. Every debutante in England hyperventilated at the mere brush of his coat. Every woman wanted to be his duchess. Except one. Elara Vance didn't just ignore the Duke. She looked at him with a hatred so cold it could freeze the Thames. He was used to being worshipped. But when he looked into her eyes, he didn't see adoration. He saw a crime he didn't know he had committed. This is the story of the only woman who said no, and why that single word would cost them both everything. The gas lamps of the Sotheby's auction house hissed softly, fighting a losing battle against the encroaching London fog. But inside the main hall, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, stale cigar smoke, and desperate ambition. Sebastian St. Clair, the 9th Duke of Alistair, sat in the front row, his long legs stretched out with an indolence that bordered on insult. He was 32, possessed of a jawline that looked carved from marble, and eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic sea. He bored easily, and tonight he was exceptionally bored. "The next item," the auctioneer announced, his voice trembling slightly as he glanced at Sebastian, "is the Celestial Chronometer, a masterful timepiece created by the late artisan Silas Vance. Bidding starts at £500. A murmur rippled through the crowd. It was a beautiful thing, a clock of brass and lapis lazuli, charting the movement of the stars. 600, a voice called out. It was Lord Kensington, a man Sebastian loathed for his loud breathing and lack of chin. Sebastian didn't look up. He simply raised a gloved finger. 1,000. The room gasped. £1,000 for a clock was absurdity. It was power. It was Sebastian reminding them that he could burn money while they counted copper pennies. 1,000 going once. 1,200. The voice was clear, feminine, and utterly devoid of the trembling reverence Sebastian was accustomed to. Sebastian froze. He slowly turned his head. Standing at the very back of the room, in the shadows where the commoners stood, was a woman. She wore a dress of plain grey wool, the kind a governess might wear, yet it was pressed to perfection. Her hair, the colour of dark roasted coffee, was pulled back severely, but a few rebellious strands framed a face that was striking not for its sweetness, but for its fierce determination. He had never seen her before, and in London society, Sebastian knew everyone worth knowing. 1,500, Sebastian drawled, turning back to the stage, dismissing her. £2,000, she countered instantly. The silence in the room was deafening. £2,000 was a fortune. Who was this grey mouse challenging the Lion of London? Sebastian felt a spark of irritation, which for him was the closest he had come to excitement in months. He stood up, turning fully to face her. He unleashed the full weight of his charm, the half-smile that had seduced countesses and opera singers alike. "My dear lady," Sebastian said, his voice smooth as velvet, "I fear you are bidding with money you do not have. I am Alistair. I always win." The woman didn't blush. She didn't look down. She stepped out of the shadows, her chin lifted. Her eyes were hazel, flecked with gold, and they burned with a strange, intense loathing. "I know who you are, Your Grace," she said, her voice carrying through the silent hall. "And money is the only thing you possess. You have no taste, no honor, and certainly no right to that clock. But since the House of Alistair is skilled at taking things that do not belong to them, I suppose I cannot stop you." The insult hit the room like a physical blow. Lady Weatherby fainted in the third row. Sebastian's smile vanished. His eyes narrowed. £3,000. The woman flinched, just barely. It was the flinch of someone who had reached their limit. She looked at the clock, her expression one of profound grief. And then she turned her back on him. "Sold to the Duke of Alistair," the auctioneer squeaked. Sebastian felt no victory. He felt only the sting of her words, taking things that do not belong to them. He strode out of the hall, ignoring the congratulations of the sycophants. He caught up to her on the damp cobblestones of Bond Street. The fog was swirling around her grey skirts. "You there!" he called out. She stopped, but didn't turn. "You have a sharp tongue," Sebastian said, coming around to face her. "I could have you arrested for slander. And I could have you arrested for theft, if the laws of England applied to dukes," she retorted, clutching her reticule tightly. "Theft? I just bought it legally." "You bought the corpse," she said bitterly. "You don't understand the soul of the machine. You just want it because it's shiny and expensive." "Who are you?" he demanded. He was used to women maneuvering to be near him, dropping handkerchiefs, batting eyelashes. He had never been looked at with such genuine repulsion. It was intoxicating. "I am nobody," she said. "Just the only person in London who sees you for what you are, a spoiled child playing with history." She hailed a passing hansom cab. As she climbed in, Sebastian stepped forward, grabbing the door handle. "I usually get what I want," he said, his voice low. "And now, I find myself wanting to know your name." She looked down at him from the carriage window. "My name is Elara Vance. And that clock you just bought? My father died making it." "Enjoy your trophy, Your Grace. It's stained with blood." She slammed the door. The cab rattled away into the fog, leaving the Duke of Alistair standing alone in the mud, clutching a £3,000 receipt and feeling, for the first time in his life, like he had lost. 3 days later, the celestial chronometer stopped. Sebastian had placed it on the mantel of his study, intending to gloat over it, but the silence of the gears irritated him. He summoned the royal clockmaker, a man named Mr. Henderson, who spent an hour tinkering with it before sweating profusely. "I cannot fix it, Your Grace," Henderson admitted, wiping his forehead. "The mechanism, it is unlike anything I have seen. It is a dual tourbillon escapement. Only the creator, Silas Vance, knew the secret. But he died in debtor's prison 5 years ago." Vance. The name echoed in Sebastian's mind. Elara Vance. "Find out where his daughter lives," Sebastian ordered his valet, Reynolds. "The woman from the auction, sir. The one who called you a thief." "The very same." It took Reynolds 2 hours. Elara Vance lived in Spitalfields, a rough, industrial district far removed from the marble halls of Mayfair. She ran a small shop called Vance and Daughter, Precision Instruments. Sebastian didn't send a servant. He didn't send a carriage. He rode his black stallion, Titan, through the grime of the East End, drawing stares from the factory workers and street urchins. He told himself he was going there to get his clock fixed. He was lying to himself. He was going there because she was the jagged edge in his smooth life, and he needed to smooth it out. He needed her to look at him with the same adoration everyone else did, just to prove he was still the Duke of Alistair. The shop was narrow, squeezed between a bakery and a gin palace. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. The air inside smelled of machine oil, sawdust, and dried lavender. It was quiet, save for the rhythmic tick-tock, tick-tock of 100 clocks lining the walls. Elara was sitting at a workbench, a magnifying loupe over one eye, working on the delicate entrails of a pocket watch. She wore a heavy leather apron over her dress. She didn't look up. "We are closed for new commissions until November," she said, her voice distracted. "I am not here for a commission," Sebastian said. Ilara froze. The screwdriver in her hand slipped, scratching the brass casing of the watch. She set the tool down slowly and removed the loop. When she turned, her face was composed, but her eyes were wary. "You are lost, Your Grace. The opium dens are 2 streets over." "Very amusing. I am here because the celestial chronometer has stopped." A flicker of pain crossed her face. It was never meant to be kept in a drafty manor house. It needs a humidified environment. You've likely seized the mainspring. "Fix it," Sebastian demanded. He leaned against the counter, filling the small space with his imposing height and the scent of expensive sandalwood soap. "No. I will pay you double whatever your rate is." "My rate for you is unavailable. Get out of my shop." Sebastian laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Miss Vance, do you realize I own the land this shop stands on? I own half of Spitalfields. I could evict you with a snap of my fingers." Ilara stood up. She was small, but her anger made her seem 10 feet tall. She walked around the counter and stood toe to toe with him. "Do it," she hissed. "Finish the job your father started." Sebastian frowned. "My father, the late Duke? What does he have to do with this?" Ilara studied his face, searching for deception. "You truly don't know, do you? Or are you just a better actor than you are a gentleman?" "I have no idea what you are talking about." 10 years ago, Ilara said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "My father, Silas Vance, was the royal horologist. He was commissioned by the Duke of Alistair, your father, to build the celestial chronometer. It took him 3 years. He poured our life savings into the materials, expecting the payment upon delivery." She took a breath, her hands balling into fists. "When he delivered it, your father claimed the jewels in the casing were fake. He accused my father of fraud. He used his influence to destroy my father's reputation. He refused to pay a penny. We lost our home. We lost everything. My father was thrown into debtor's prison, where he died of pneumonia." Sebastian stared at her. He felt a cold pit opening in his stomach. His father, the 8th Duke, had been a hard man, ruthless in business. But a thief? "You are mistaken," Sebastian said, though his voice lacked conviction. "My father was a man of honor." "Your father," Ilara spat, "kept the clock. If the jewels were fake, why did he keep it? He hid it away in his vault, and when he died, his estate managers auctioned it off, likely not knowing its history. You just bought stolen property, Your Grace. You paid £3,000 for the instrument that killed my father." The silence in the shop was heavy, suffocating. The ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder, like a collective heartbeat condemning him. Sebastian looked at the woman before him. Her hands were rough from work, her dress was patched, and her eyes were filled with a righteous fire that made her more beautiful than any silk-draped debutante he had ever met. He had come here to conquer her. Instead, he felt the ground beneath him crumbling. I didn't know," Sebastian said quietly. "Now you do," Ilara said, turning back to her workbench. "Take your clock and leave. Every time you look at it, I hope you see his face." Sebastian stood there for a long moment. He should leave. He should storm out, call her a liar, and evict her to save his pride. That was what a duke would do. But Sebastian St. Clair was tired of being a duke. "I have a proposition," he said. Ilara didn't turn around. "I'm not interested. I see a pile of invoices on your desk, Miss Vance. Red ink. You are in debt." She stiffened. It was true. The creditors were coming next week. "I will not just pay you to fix the clock," Sebastian said, his voice shifting from command to negotiation. I will return the clock to you. It belongs to your family. But, Elara turned slowly. But? But I cannot give it to you broken. It would be an insult to your father's memory. Come to Alistair House, repair the chronometer. Once it chimes again, I will sign the deed of ownership over to you, along with a check for the original sum my father owed yours, with 10 years of interest. Elara stared at him. It was an offer that would save her life. It would restore her father's legacy. But it meant spending days, perhaps weeks, in the home of the enemy. Why? She asked suspiciously. Why would you do this? Sebastian stepped closer, his gaze intense. Because, Miss Vance, I have been accused of many things. Arrogance, vanity, selfishness. But never theft. I want to clear my name. And he hesitated, looking at her mouth, then back to her eyes. And I am finding that I do not like the idea of you hating me. Elara hesitated. She looked at the invoices on her desk. She looked at the Duke, stripping away his arrogance to reveal something raw underneath. I will come, she said, her voice steely. I will fix the clock. I will take my money. But do not think for a second, Sebastian St. Clair, that you can buy my forgiveness. Sebastian smiled, but this time it wasn't his charming, practiced smile. It was a small, dangerous curve of the lips. We shall see, Elara. We shall see. Alistair House was not a home. It was a monument to excessive wealth carved from Portland stone, dominating the northern side of Grosvenor Square. When Elara arrived 2 days later, carrying a satchel of her most precious tools, she felt like a sparrow entering a cathedral built for hawks. The butler, a man named Finch, whose spine seemed made of steel piping, looked down his nose at her shabby portmanteau. The tradesperson entrance is at the rear, miss. I am a guest of the Duke, Elara said, her voice clipped. She was terrified, but she would sooner die than show it here, in the belly, of the beast that had devoured her father. Before Finch could argue, Sebastian appeared at the top of the sweeping marble staircase. He was dressed for riding, in polished boots and a tailored jacket that accentuated the breadth of his shoulders. The sight of him, so effortlessly powerful, so undeniably handsome, sent an irritating jolt through her stomach. Finch, Sebastian said, his voice echoing in the vast foyer. Miss Vance is to be treated with the same deference you would show a visiting duchess. Show her to the blue suite. Finch's eyebrows nearly hit his receding hairline. The blue suite, Your Grace? But that is usually reserved for royalty. And Miss Vance is royalty in her field. Do as I say. Elara held her ground as Sebastian descended the stairs. I do not need a suite, Your Grace. I need a workbench and good light. You shall have both, Sebastian said, stopping on the step above her, forcing her to look up at him. The proximity was overwhelming. He smelled of fresh air, leather, and that maddening sandalwood soap. You are here to restore a masterpiece. You should be housed accordingly. I am here to settle a debt, she reminded him sharply. Do not confuse the two. He smiled, that slow, dangerous curve of his lips that seemed to promise trouble. I am beginning to realize, Elara, that with you, everything is a battle. I look forward to the war. He had the chronometer moved not to a workshop, but to the library, a cavernous room filled with towering mahogany bookshelves and smelling of aged leather and brandy. It was his inner sanctum. He had a large oak desk cleared for her near a towering window overlooking the garden. When she laid out her tools, delicate screwdrivers, tweezers, tiny vials of oil, they looked absurdly small against the massive furniture. For the first 3 days, they existed in a strange, tense orbit. Elara worked with obsessive focus, dismantling the clock with surgical precision. She found the damage immediately. The mainspring barrel had seized due to humidity, just as she suspected. But the damage had stressed the delicate escapement mechanism, her father's genius invention. It required forging tiny replacement parts, a task of immense delicacy. Sebastian, to her utter frustration, didn't leave her alone. He sat at his own desk, pretending to read correspondence, but she felt his gaze on her constantly. It was a physical weight. "Must you hover?" she snapped on the fourth afternoon, throwing down her magnifying loupe. "It is impossible to concentrate with the Duke of Alistair breathing down my neck." Sebastian set aside his papers and strolled over. He didn't apologize. Instead, he leaned over her shoulder to look at the intricate array of gears spread across the velvet cloth. "It's extraordinary," he murmured, his breath stirring the stray hairs at her temple. He wasn't looking at her. He was genuinely captivated by the machinery. "It looks like a miniature city of brass." "It is a map of the heavens," Elara corrected, her voice softening slightly against her will. She pointed with a pair of tweezers. "This gear tracks the lunar cycle. This cam operates the constellation dial. My father, he didn't just want to tell time. He wanted to capture eternity in a box." Sebastian looked at her then, and the intensity of his Atlantic blue eyes caught her off guard. There was no arrogance in them, only a strange, naked vulnerability. "He must have loved you very much," Sebastian said quietly. "To teach you this." The mention of her father's love brought a sudden lump to her throat. "He did. More than your father ever understood about anything." Sebastian winced slightly. He reached out, perhaps to touch her arm, but thought better of it. Instead, his hand hovered over a tiny diamond-tipped drill bit. "What is this for?" he asked, changing the subject. "Do not touch that," she said instinctively, reaching to intercept his hand. Her fingers brushed his. A shock, static and sharp, zipped between them. They both froze. It was the first time they had touched, really touched, without anger. His skin was warm, his fingers surprisingly calloused for a nobleman. For a terrifying second, neither of them pulled away. The air in the library became thick, charged with unspoken things. Elara snatched her hand back as if burned. "It is for drilling pivots in sapphires," she said breathlessly, staring intently at the table. Sebastian cleared his throat and stepped back. "Right. Of course. I have matters to attend to at my club." He fled the room. Elara watched him go, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She hated him. She despised everything he stood for. So why did her skin tingle where he had touched her? 2 weeks passed. The restoration was agonizingly slow. Elara was forced to forge a tiny replacement lever in the estate's smithy, enduring the heat and the soot just to get the metal temperament exactly right. Sebastian watched it all. He seemed to have given up his usual social life entirely, preferring to spend his evenings in the library, watching Elara Vance, covered in grease, wrestling with metal. He found himself fascinated, not just by her skill, but by her mind. She was unlike the debutantes who tittered behind fans and agreed with everything he said. Elara challenged him on everything: politics, literature, the ethics of land ownership. One rainy night, a thunderstorm raged over London, battering the library windows. They were working late by lamplight. Elara was exhausted, her eyes burning. She was trying to recalibrate the dual tourbillon, a task requiring inhuman patience. She let out a frustrated sigh and rubbed her temples. "You should sleep." Sebastian's voice came from the shadows of a wing-back chair where he had been nursing a brandy for an hour. "I almost have it," she muttered. "The balance is off by a fraction of a millimeter." Sebastian rose and came to the desk. He poured a small amount of brandy into a fresh glass and held it out to her. "Drink this. It will steady your hands, or at least dull the frustration." She hesitated, then took the glass. Their fingers brushed again. This time, neither of them flinched. The brandy burned pleasantly all the way down. "Why are you still here, Sebastian?" The name slipped out before she could add the title. He looked startled by the use of his given name, then pleased. He sat on the edge of the desk, heedless of the expensive wood. "Because," he said slowly, swirling his drink, "I find the company in Grosvenor Square has become intolerably dull of late. They only ever tell me what I want to hear. You, Elara, have never once done that. I am not paid to flatter you. No, you are here because of the sins of my father." He took a large swallow of brandy. "He was a hard man, Elara. He believed that being a duke meant never being wrong, never apologizing. He taught me that weakness was death." He looked down at her, his eyes dark pools in the lamplight. "When you stood up to me at the auction, when you looked at me as if I were dirt, it was the first time anyone had ever made me feel small. I hated you for it. And then I wanted to own you for it." Elara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "And now, do you still wish to own me?" Sebastian reached out and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was searing. "Now," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I fear it is the other way around. I fear you have disassembled me, Elara, just as thoroughly as that clock, and I do not know if I can be put back together the same way." Elara's breath caught. She looked up into his face, seeing the raw longing there. It mirrored the terrifying ache growing in her own chest. She wanted to hate him. It was safer to hate him. But the man sitting on the desk wasn't the arrogant god of Mayfair. He was just a man, lonely and burdened, offering her his vulnerability. "Sebastian," she breathed. He leaned closer. The scent of sandalwood and brandy filled her senses. His gaze dropped to her lips. She didn't pull away. She leaned in, just a fraction of an inch, an admission of surrender. The heavy oak doors of the library swung open with a resounding crash. They sprang apart, guilty as teenagers caught behind the schoolhouse. Standing in the doorway was a vision in crimson silk. Lady Beatrice Corbin was the daughter of a marquess, blonde, flawlessly beautiful, and widely considered to be the future Duchess of Alistair. Her icy blue eyes took in the scene instantly, the proximity, the brandy glasses, the flushed faces. "Sebastian," Lady Beatrice said, her voice like shards of glass wrapped in velvet. "Finch said you were working late. I did not realize your mechanic required such close supervision." The spell was broken. The cold reality of their different worlds crashed back into the room. Sebastian stood up, instantly composing his features into the mask of the Duke, but Elara saw the flash of irritation in his eyes. "Beatrice, to what do I owe the pleasure at this hour?" Beatrice swept into the room, ignoring Elara entirely as if she were a piece of furniture. She laid a gloved hand possessively on Sebastian's arm. "The opera, darling. You promised weeks ago. Mother is waiting in the carriage. Surely you haven't forgotten us for this?" She waved a dismissive hand toward the priceless clock components. Sebastian looked at Beatrice's hand on his arm, then at Elara, who had retreated behind the desk, her face closed and cold once more. "Of course not," Sebastian said stiffly. "I will get my coat." He looked back at Elara one last time before leaving the room with Beatrice. His eyes were apologetic, pleading for understanding. But Elara just picked up her loop and bent over the gears. The moment the door closed, a single hot tear splashed onto the brass lunar gear. She furiously wiped it away. She had almost forgotten who he was. Lady Beatrice was a timely reminder. Dukes did not fall in love with clockmakers from Spitalfields. They toyed with them, and then they went to the opera with their own kind. The arrival of Lady Beatrice changed the atmosphere in Alistair House, from tense to poisonous. She did not leave after the opera. She stayed, ostensibly to help Sebastian prepare for the upcoming summer ball, but in reality, to mark her territory. Beatrice was a master of subtle cruelty. She never insulted Elara directly in front of Sebastian. Instead, it was death by 1,000 cuts. When Elara crossed the foyer, Beatrice would loudly ask Finch to ensure the tradespeople used the servants' stairs so as not to muddy the carpets. When Sebastian praised Elara's progress at dinner, which he insisted Elara attend, much to Beatrice's horror, Beatrice would sweetly ask Elara if it was difficult to understand such complex machinery with a woman's limited education. Elara bore it with stony silence. She was close to finishing the clock. 3 more days, perhaps 4. Then she could take her money, clear her father's name, and leave this gilded cage forever. Sebastian was caught in the middle. He grew increasingly distant with Beatrice, his patience fraying at her constant presence. He tried to find moments alone with Elara, but Beatrice was like a limpet, always there, always interjecting, always reminding them of the social chasm between them. The tension came to a head 3 days before the summer ball. Sebastian had announced that the unveiling of the restored celestial chronometer would be the highlight of the evening. He wanted all of London to see Elara's genius. Elara was in the library, performing the final synchronization of the chimes. It was delicate, nerve-wracking work. One wrong turn of a screw could ruin weeks of effort. She took a break for luncheon, stepping out into the garden for fresh air. When she returned 20 minutes later, her stomach dropped. The library door was ajar. She rushed in. The chronometer sat on the desk, gleaming in the afternoon sun. But something was wrong. The delicate cadence of the ticking had changed. It was irregular. Limping. Elara ran to the desk. The glass casing, which she had locked before leaving, was unlocked. Lying on the velvet cloth next to the clock was one of her smallest, diamond-tipped screwdrivers. She looked inside the mechanism. Her heart stopped. The dual tourbillon balance spring, the very heart of the clock, the piece that had taken her father years to perfect and her weeks to calibrate, was bent. Not just bent, it had been deliberately, viciously twisted with a tool. It wasn't an accident. It was murder of a machine. A cold fury, unlike anything she had ever felt, washed over her. Only 2 people had access to this room. Only 2 people knew where she kept the key to the casing. Sebastian. Had it all been a lie? Had the vulnerable moments, the near kiss, the shared confidences been a grand game to lower her guard? Had he realized that by restoring the clock, she proved his father a liar and decided to destroy her work instead to protect the family name? It was exactly what his father would have done. The door opened. Sebastian walked in, smiling. Elara, I managed to escape Beatrice for 10 minutes. I wanted to see. He stopped, seeing her face. She was pale as death, her eyes burning with betrayal. What is it? He asked, stepping forward. Get away from me, she hissed, backing away until she hit the bookshelves. Elara, what has happened? She pointed a trembling finger at the clock. You did this. You couldn't bear it, could you? You couldn't bear to let the daughter of a debtor win. Sebastian looked at the clock, then back at her. Genuine confusion on his face. I don't understand. What are you accusing me of? Don't lie to me, she screamed, the dam breaking. The balance spring is destroyed, deliberately. You are the only other person with a key. You lured me here with promises of honor, made me fall for your act. And then you sabotage my father's legacy again. Elara, I swear to you I did not touch it, Sebastian pleaded, reaching for her. Do not touch me with the same hands you used to break it. She grabbed her satchel of tools, shoving them in haphazardly. I am leaving. You can keep your blood money. You can keep your broken clock. You deserve each other. She stormed toward the door. Elara, wait! Please, listen to me! She ignored him. She threw open the heavy oak door, right into the path of Lady Beatrice, who was standing just outside, a look of smug, predatory satisfaction plastered across her beautiful face. Going somewhere, Miss Vance? Beatrice purred. So soon? Before the grand unveiling? Elara looked from Beatrice's triumphant smirk to Sebastian's devastated face. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. It hadn't been Sebastian. The serpent was not the lion. It was the viper in silk standing before her. The silence in the library corridor was heavier than the oak doors framing it. Elara looked from Beatrice's smirk, a viper satisfied with its strike, to Sebastian's face, which had drained of all color as the realization hit him. It wasn't you, Elara whispered, the words tasting like ashes. It was her. Sebastian turned slowly toward Beatrice. The charming, rakish duke vanished. In his place was the cold, ruthless aristocrat whose ancestors had commanded armies. His eyes were glacial. Beatrice, Sebastian said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. Tell me you did not just destroy a man's life's work out of petty jealousy. Beatrice's smirk faltered. She adjusted her diamond earring with feigned nonchalance. Don't be absurd, darling. I was merely ensuring that common little shop girl didn't get above her station. She was distracting you. I did you a favor. Sebastian looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. The shallowness, the cruelty, hidden beneath layers of silk and social grace. He hated what he saw. He hated that he had ever entertained the idea of marrying her. A favor? Sebastian walked toward her. Beatrice actually took a step back, intimidated by the raw fury radiating from him. You have committed a crime in my home. You have dishonored me. You are to leave Alistair House immediately. If I ever see your face again, I will ensure you are cut by every decent family in London. Get out. Beatrice gasped, her face crumbling from smugness to shock. She looked to Elara for some kind of female solidarity, but found only stone. With a strangled sob of humiliation, the Lady Beatrice Corbin turned and fled down the corridor, her heels clicking like frantic gunshots on the marble. Sebastian turned back to the library, desperation in his eyes. Elara, please, you must believe me. I didn't know the depths of her venom. Elara stood by the desk, looking at the bent balance spring. Her shoulders shook, not with crying, but with the effort of holding herself together. It doesn't matter, Sebastian, she said, her voice hollow. Don't, you see? This is what your world does to mine. Your father crushed my father with a lie. Your intended bride crushed his legacy with a screwdriver. You people, you break things you don't understand just because you can. I am not those people, Sebastian pleaded, crossing the room to grasp her shoulders. Elara, look at me. I am not my father, and I am certainly not Beatrice. She looked up at him. Her hazel eyes, usually so fierce, were dull with exhaustion and heartbreak. Aren't you? You brought me here as a trophy, a challenge. You used your wealth to force me into your home. How is that different? The accusation hit him hard because it was true. That was how it had started. "It is different because I changed," he vowed fiercely. "Because in watching you, I saw everything that is lacking in my own life. Ilara, I—" "Stop!" She pulled away from his touch. "Do not say it. You will only ruin it." She hurriedly packed the rest of her tools, closing the leather satchel with finality. "The deal is forfeit. The clock is broken. I am going back to Spitalfields, where at least the thieves are honest about what they are. You cannot leave like this. Let me fix it. Let me— Goodbye, Your Grace." She didn't look back. She walked out of the library, down the grand staircase, past a gaping Finch, and out the front door of Alistair House. She walked until her feet bled in her thin boots, all the way back to the smoke and grime of the East End, leaving the Duke of Alistair alone in his palatial prison with a broken clock and a broken heart. For 3 days, Sebastian did not leave the library. He drank too much scotch and stared at the crippled chronometer. He had never felt failure before. He found it tasted bitter, like bile. He couldn't just fix the clock. Ilara was right. That wasn't enough. He had to fix the rot at the foundation of it all. On the 4th night, fueled by caffeine and self-loathing, he unlocked his father's private vault, hidden behind a false bookcase in the study. The place where the 8th Duke had kept his darkest secrets. It smelled of dust and old sins. Sebastian tore through ledgers, contracts, and private correspondence, searching for the year Silas Vance had built the clock. He found it in a black leather journal. His father's handwriting was cramped and aggressive. Sept 14/9, 1878. The Vance clock is delivered. It is magnificent, a true marvel, but the price is absurd. Vance is a weak man, desperate for approval. I told him the sapphires were flawed. He crumbled instantly. "I shall withhold payment. He has no recourse. The man is an artisan, not a businessman. He will never fight a duke." Sebastian stared at the entry, horrified. It was all there in black and white. His father hadn't just refused to pay. He had admired the work while actively destroying the maker. It was cold-blooded theft, infinitely worse than Ilara had described. Sebastian closed the journal. He felt sick. He was living on stolen glory. At dawn, the rain was lashing down on Spitalfields. Sebastian, unshaven and wearing a plain wool coat to avoid attention, banged on the door of Vance and daughter. Ilara opened the door, looking exhausted. Her eyes widened when she saw him, soaking wet on her doorstep. "Did you come to evict me yourself?" she asked bitterly. Sebastian didn't speak. He simply held out the black journal, open to the damning page. Ilara took it suspiciously. As she read, her breath hitched. She read it twice, 3 times. When she looked up, her eyes were swimming with tears. "You found it," she whispered. "It was true. He knew it was magnificent." "He was a thief and a liar," Sebastian said, his voice harsh with shame. "And I am the son who benefited from his crimes. I have no right to ask you for anything, Ilara, but I am begging you." He reached under his coat and pulled out a velvet-wrapped bundle. "The chronometer." "Be at the summer ball tomorrow night," Sebastian said. "Finish it." "Not for me. For him. Fix it so that when I stand before London and read this journal entry aloud, the clock can chime and prove that Silas Vance was the greatest genius of his age." Ilara stared at him. "You would do that? You would publicly brand your father a thief to the entire peerage? It would scandalize your name forever." "My name is already scandalized by the truth," Sebastian said fiercely. "I don't care about their opinion anymore, Ilara. I only care about yours." He placed the clock and the journal in her hands. "Please." He turned and walked away into the rain, not daring to hope. The night of the Alistair summer ball was the event of the season. The ballroom was a sea of diamonds, silks, and hushed gossip about the broken engagement with Lady Beatrice. Sebastian moved through the crowd like a ghost, his eyes constantly darting to the gallery entrance. He had set up a pedestal in the center of the room, draped in velvet. At 10 o'clock, the music stopped. Sebastian stepped onto the dais. The room fell silent. "My lords, ladies, and distinguished guests," Sebastian began, his voice ringing clear. "Tonight I promised you a marvel, the unveiling of the celestial chronometer." He gestured to the back of the room. The massive doors opened. Ilara Vance walked in. She was not wearing grey wool. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that Sebastian had anonymously commissioned for her, embroidered with silver thread in the pattern of constellations. She looked regal, terrifying, and utterly breathtaking. In her hands, she carried the chronometer, gleaming under the gaslights. A murmur went through the crowd. Who was this woman? Ilara walked through the parting crowd, her head high, and placed the clock on the pedestal. She looked at Sebastian, gave a nearly imperceptible nod, and stepped back. Sebastian did not unveil the clock immediately. Instead, he pulled out the black journal. "Before we hear the chimes of eternity," Sebastian said, "we must hear the truth of the past." He read his father's journal entry. Every word was a bombshell. The room gasped. Fans fluttered furiously. The god of Mayfair was dismantling his own pedestal, brick by brick, confessing his family's sins to lift up the daughter of a debtor. When he finished reading, the silence was profound. "The House of Alistair owes a debt that can never fully be repaid," Sebastian said, looking directly at Ilara. "But we can start by acknowledging the genius of Silas Vance, brought back to life by the equal genius of his daughter, Ilara Vance." He pulled the velvet cloth away. The celestial chronometer sat there, a shimmering city of brass and jewels, and then, as if on cue, the mainspring engaged. The gears whirred softly. A beautiful, complex series of chimes began to ring out, a melody that sounded like starlight turned into sound. The room erupted in applause. It was a triumph. Ilara watched the clock, tears streaming down her face, feeling her father's presence in the music. She looked at Sebastian. He wasn't looking at the crowd's adoration. He was looking only at her, with an expression of such naked devotion that it terrified her more than his anger ever had. The applause that erupted in the ballroom was not the polite, gloved clapping of the London elite. It was a roar of shock, a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and the shattering of a century-old reputation. Sebastian stood alone on the dais, the god of Mayfair, stripped of his armor, watching the woman he loved retreat into the shadows. Ilara didn't stop walking. The adoration of the crowd felt heavier than their scorn ever had. She felt stripped raw, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She pushed through the heavy velvet curtains and stumbled out onto the terrace, the cool night air hitting her flushed skin like a physical blow. She didn't stop there. She ran down the stone steps, her midnight blue silk gown rustling violently, fleeing into the labyrinthine shadows of the Alistair Gardens. She ran until her lungs burned, finally collapsing onto a stone bench beneath a weeping willow near the ornamental lake. The silence here was profound, broken only by the distant, muffled sounds of the orchestra, trying frantically to restart a waltz to cover the scandal. "We did it, Papa," she whispered to the darkness, clutching the cold stone of the bench. "He knows. They all know." But instead of triumph, she felt a crushing, suffocating fear. Sebastian had just immolated his family name for her. He had taken the pristine legacy of the St. Clairs and doused it in kerosene. Tomorrow, the papers would destroy him. He would be the pariah duke, the son of a thief. and he had done it for a clockmaker's daughter. The guilt was a physical weight in her stomach. She couldn't let him ruin his life. She had to leave. Now, before the sunrise brought the consequences. I thought I might find you here. The voice was rough, stripping away the silence. Ilara froze, then stood slowly to face him. Sebastian was standing at the entrance to the Willow's canopy. He looked nothing like the composed aristocrat who had owned the auction house weeks ago. His cravat was undone, hanging loose around his neck. His hair was wind-blown, and his chest was heaving as if he had run the entire distance from the ballroom. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. They were wild, desperate, and burning with an intensity that terrified her. "You ran," he said, stepping into the moonlight. "After everything, you ran." "I had to," Ilara said, her voice trembling but determined. "Go back inside, Sebastian. Go fix it. Tell them you were delirious. Tell them it was a jest. If you go now, you can salvage your reputation." Sebastian let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, stopping inches from her, invading her space with his heat and the scent of sandalwood and adrenaline. "Salvage it." "Ilara, I burned the bridge. I watched it turn to ash, and I smiled while it happened. Do you truly think I care about their whispers?" "You will," she cried, backing up until her legs hit the stone bench. "You are the Duke of Alistair. You are the Lion of London. You thrive on their respect. Tomorrow, when they cut you in the street, when you are uninvited from the clubs, when the king demands an explanation, you will hate me. You will look at me and see the woman who cost you everything." "Look at me!" he roared, the sound echoing across the water. Ilara flinched, looking up into his face. "I have spent 32 years being the Lion of London," Sebastian said, his voice dropping to a fierce, shaking whisper. "I have spent every day in a cage of gold, surrounded by people who do not know me, who do not care if I live or die, so long as the champagne is cold and the checks clear. I was a mechanism, Ilara, just like your clock, a machine performing a function." He reached out, his large hands trembling slightly as he cupped her face. His thumbs traced the line of her jaw, his touch searing. "Then you stood up in that auction hall," he continued, his eyes searching hers. "You looked at me with that fire in your eyes, and for the first time in my life, I felt a gear turn. You are the grit in the machine, Ilara Vance. You broke the mechanism, and thank God you did, because I was suffocating. Sebastian, please." Tears spilled over her lashes, hot and fast. "We are too different. Oil and water, silk and steel. It cannot work." "Why?" he demanded. "Because of a title? Because of money? I have enough money to buy a country, Ilara. I don't need a duchess who knows which fork to use. I need you. I need the woman who fixes broken things. Because I am broken, Ilara. I am so terribly broken, and you are the only one who holds the tools to put me back together." The vulnerability in his voice shattered her defenses. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a seduction. This was a man laying his soul bare on the chopping block. Ilara reached up, her hands gripping the lapels of his jacket to steady herself. "You're a fool, Sebastian St. Clair. An arrogant, reckless, wonderful fool. Tell me to go," he challenged, his forehead resting against hers, their breath mingling in the cold air. "Tell me you feel nothing. Tell me that when we are in the same room, the air doesn't change. Lie to me, Ilara, and I will walk away." She looked into the Atlantic blue storm of his eyes. She thought of her lonely shop in Spitalfields. She thought of the way he had looked at her father's journal, with shame, but also with honor. "I cannot," she whispered. Sebastian let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. He didn't wait. He crushed his mouth to hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was an explosion. It was the collision of two worlds that had been orbiting each other dangerously for weeks. It was desperate and hungry, filled with all the anger, fear, and longing they had suppressed. Elara opened to him, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer, anchoring him to her. He kissed her, as if she were the air he had been denied. He lifted her easily, setting her onto the high stone balustrade so they were eye to eye, stepping between her knees, pressing her against the vast, starry sky. "I love you," he murmured against her lips, the words vibrating against her skin. "I love your sharp tongue. I love your grease-stained hands. I love that you hate me half the time. I love you, Elara." "I don't hate you," she confessed, breathless, her forehead resting against his. "I tried. Lord knows I tried. But I love you, Sebastian. I love you more than I love my pride." He pulled back slightly, his expression deadly serious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was the key to the celestial chronometer. He pressed the brass key into her palm and closed her fingers over it. "This clock is the heart of my house," he said. "My father stole it. I am returning it. But I am asking you to leave it here. On one condition." Elara looked at the key, then at him. "What condition?" "That you stay with it," Sebastian said. "Marry me, Elara. Not to be a duchess, not to be a hostess. Marry me to be my partner. We will turn Alistair House into a workshop, if you like. We will fill the ballroom with gears and springs. We will scandalize every peer in England. Just stay. Stay and be the only thing in my life that is real." Elara looked over his shoulder at the lights of the mansion. A house that had been a fortress of lies, now waiting to be filled with truth. She looked at the man who was willing to burn it all down for her. She smiled, and it was a smile that lit up the shadows of the garden. "I suppose," she said softly, "that someone needs to keep the celestial chronometer wound. It is a very temperamental machine, Your Grace." Sebastian grinned, the darkness leaving his eyes, replaced by a radiant joy. "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes," she laughed. "But be warned, Sebastian, I have a lot of debt, and I am very expensive." "I count on it," he said, and he kissed her again, deep and slow, sealing the contract not with a signature, but with a promise. High above them, in the ballroom, the celestial chronometer struck the hour. Its chimes rang out clear and true, drifting over the garden, over the walls of the estate, and out into the slumbering city of London. It was midnight. A new day had begun. The Duke and the clockmaker stood wrapped in each other's arms, ignoring the world that would try to tear them apart tomorrow. For tonight, they were timeless. And so, the Duke, who could have any woman in London, chose the only one who dared to say no. Sebastian and Elara scandalized society by marrying 3 weeks later in a small ceremony in Spitalfields. They spent the rest of their lives ignoring the rules of the peerage, filling Alistair House with ticking clocks, laughter, and a love that was built not on titles, but on the hard-won truth. If you enjoyed this story of pride, prejudice, and a love worth burning down the world for, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new romance drama. What did you think of Sebastian's grand gesture at the ball? Let me know down in the comments. Until next time, keep the romance alive.